Alright, I'd like to give you a quick mini session on how to understand the Nashville number system. It is much, much easier than you think. Don't overthink it. If you're familiar with your scales already, and you know where all your sharps and flats go within each scale, you might have an easier time. But if you have no idea what a scale is, no worries. I'm going to explain it right now. In the key of C, C is your number 1. So on your left hand, put up your thumb. C is number 1. Hi C. Hi number 1. We're calling it number 1 right now. Later on, number 1 will be a different letter. But because we're looking at pennies from heaven, I'd like to talk about C. Number 2 would be a D. You can see how it's catty corner, down and over. Number 3 is where you hop over a note and you get to an E. Then you go diagonally up to an F. Number 5 is a G. Number 6 is an A. And number 7 is a B in this key. So looking at your chart, you can see that C is number 1, D is 2, E is 3, F is 4, G is 5, A is 6, and B is 7. Now why are they in this funny order over there? Well, because they're all aligned in the same format that we see on something called the circle of fifths. Circle of fifths. One note going up by 5, going around in a circle is perfect mathematics, and it's basically a calculator, so much so that I do have one tattooed right here on my arm. So there's my C, D, E, F, G, A, B. Now I'm just seeing it on my arm in the context of every single key. Everything relates, this relates to this, the same way this one relates to this, the same way this one relates to this. It goes around in a perfect circle. So it's basically like a compass. Circle of fifths is kind of a different, not a different topic, but you don't need it in order to understand numbers. All you need is your hand. So we've already got C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. Then it starts over at C, which we just go back to the number 1 for. So when we're reading music and we see something like on the first line of Pennies from Heaven, it starts off with a C chord, so I'll call that the number 1. And when I'm calling out numbers in the number section, you'll hear me say the 1 chord, and that means C. The next one that comes up is an E minor 7. Now the minor 7 is the style of chord. Here's an E minor 7. Here's an E minor. Here is an E chord, major chord. Here's an E dominant chord, which is a 7. Now they all have different sounds. They all have different kinds of personalities, and each one evokes a certain emotion within us. And you will learn to recognize that. But those little things attached to E, those are called extensions. So we are going to call it, we're still going to call E number 3 because we had C, D, and E. So when I'm calling out the chord, you might hear me just say 3. Now, it's your job to know if it's a 3 minor 7, if it's a 3 minor, if it's a 3 major, if it's a 3 dominant 7. That's going to be up to you to remember unless I call out minor 2nd, minor 3rd. In this case, there's an awful lot going on, so I might have just called out the 3. And when I say 3, I'm referring to the E, which is the root of that chord. The tricky part is the next one that follows is an E flat. There is no E flat in our scale. C, D, E, F, G, A, B. So it is an E flat. So I could call it a flatted E. That would be accurate as well, but we usually say E flat. But when I'm referring to the number, I could call it a flatted 3rd. It's the 3rd note of my scale, and it's a flat. It's an E flat, not an E. So as you know on the piano, an E note is a white key, and an E flat is the black key right behind it. So those are 2 separate keys, even though they both start with an E. there's an E, and there's an E flat. On our ukulele, it sounds like this. Here's the E, here's the E flat. Totally different note, even though it has a name that's very similar. So again, when calling out chords for this song, Pennies from Heaven, I would say, play the 1 chord, C. Play the 3 chord as a minor 7. Now play the flat 3rd diminished 7. Diminished 7 is just the extension that follows. Then I say play the minor 2nd, which is a D minor. The 2nd, which is D, C, D, and it's a minor, so I call it a minor 2nd. And then I might say dominant 5th, or dominant 5. 5 is always dominant. I mean, it's so rarely not dominant. So whenever I say 5, I usually mean whatever note is in position 5 with a little 7 attached to it. Now, there's a lot of numbers that go around in the Nashville number system, and they all kind of are relating to different things. So when I say the 5th note of my scale, I'm talking about what chord is seated here in position 5. C is number 1, D is 2, E is 3, F is 4, G is in position 5. So position 5 is where G is. So I call him my 5th, or my 5. What kind of chord G is going to be important. But I'll tell you right now that number 5 is almost always a dominant 7 chord. Dominant 7 means it's got a little 7 attached to it. Don't think of the 7 as in terms of this 7. That's not it at all. This has a little 7 attached to it, which means it's a fiery chord. It's got some, I think of it as being like it's a little on fire. So if I just said play the 5, and it was just a regular 5, that would be G. But in this key, it's okay. But the dominant 5 is a lot more popular because it gives a little bit of sass. At the end of Pennies from Heaven, you'll see something called a 1, 6, 2, 5. And that you hear me say a teen amount of times. I will always talk about the 1, 6, 2, 5 because it's a progression of chords which you find in every single jazz song. Happens again in this tutorial in the key of B flat. So we've got 1, 6, 2, 5. Let's see if you guys can figure it out at home. You've got the 1. Okay, you know what the 1 is, so you're going to play a C chord. That's right. Now we're going to play the 6. C, D, E, F, G, A. Now A is usually played as a minor, but in jazz music we often play it as a dominant. So it's the 6th note of the scale, A, and we're going to put that little 7 attached to it to make it dominant. So far we have a 1, a 6, isn't that nice? And we'll do a minor 2, C, D, so D minor, and then a dominant 5 with a fiery 7 on top, so we got G7. So if I say, what's your 1, 6, 2, 5 in C, you're going to play C, A, D, and G. Now they do vary up. Sometimes it's C, A minor, D minor, G7. Sometimes it's C, A7, D7, G7. A lot of 7s in there. So that's the kind of song that's going to have a lot more energy to it. If it's a softer, sweeter song like in the 50s, they used a 1, 6, 2, 5. They used all minors. Not all, because you can't make a C minor. That won't work. Your number 1, it's got to stay as a 1 major. You can make little changes to it, but you don't want it to be a dominant. You don't want it to be anything besides what it is. It needs to be the source. So you got to make sure it's nice and strong and stays as a C. Let's do it one more time with another key that is a little less intuitive, key of B flat. So if we're playing a song in the key of B flat, I want you to find your 1, 6, 2, 5. You would have a B flat. We can play the full B flat or just the partial one. And the 6 would be a G. That's right. So I make it a dominant G, so a G7. You'll also see this written in the music as a B diminished. If you play a full B diminished, you'll notice it has the G7 embedded right in it, plus one extra little note. I still call that progression 1-6-2-5, even though it looks like a 1 diminished. If that confuses you, ignore what I'm saying right now. So we have our 1, we have our 6. We'll do a minor 2, but I often make it a minor 7 because it's just prettier that way. C minor 7. And then in the song we're doing My Blue Heaven, we're doing a new kind of F7. And that's our 5. Because in the key of B flat, we've got B flat, C, D, E flat, F, G, A, comes back around to B flat. You'll notice that scales are always alphabetical. So knowing where your sharps and flats are is important, but just knowing your alphabet is even more important. So in the key of B flat, we've got B flat for our 1. Our 6 is a G. Our 2 is a C minor. And our 5 is an F. So once you get used to looking at one of these charts, you can kind of say, oh wow, it's always in the same order. It's like a little Star of David sort of. It's like a little triangle and then an upside down triangle. And then you got the 7, which is kind of off to the side a little bit, kind of an outcast. So I hope that's helped. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'll be doing some more videos on how to work out the Nashville number system because it is so cool and so much fun to remember songs this way and to discuss music with other musicians. Greater understanding you'll have if you understand. Did that sound like Yoda just now? That didn't make any sense.